Welcome to Team Futurism. Today I am interviewing Sam Eliot, and we're going to be talking about the future, as we do, kind of from the world of the arts, I would say. I think that we're going to be approaching this from the world of the arts. The other day I was listening to a podcast that featured good old Eric Weinstein, and he was lamenting that artists of today aren't able to, they have no idea what's going on, and so they can't comment on the modern state of the world. He said, as opposed to in the 1960s, you would listen to a record and it would almost be as if listening to the news. But artists today have no idea what's going on. Do you think that that's true?
Yeah, I think ultimately the idea of having a concrete narrative around what is happening and why in the world is no longer an easy, digestible. It's not something that you can write a song about. You can or make an artwork about. I mean, maybe there's certain things that feel kind of universal, like the environment, maybe. But, when we're talking about things like social issues or even, the cause and effect relationships of events that happened 2 weeks ago, I don't think there's really a hegemonic narrative that you can pull out of that anymore. And I think it's just the kind of media hypersaturation that we live in now. And just the amount of kind of competing voices, and there's just so much kind of cognitive real estate for people to have their own realities in ways that are socially true. I would argue.
I'm kind of skeptical of the premise a little bit. This idea that you ever could listen to a song and it would be like watching the news. I'm kind of okay. So there's this guy, Jean Baudrillard, who I love referencing, and he has this essay called "The Gulf War Didn't Exist."
Yeah, I've read that. Yeah,
and it was just this whole thing that our experience with the Gulf War was sitting around in our living rooms watching the television about the Gulf War, but you're not yet that television show is so completely removed from what's happening on the ground.
Yeah,
with some random guy getting shot with troop movements or just whatever is actually going on. And even that is just its own little world that's you could, write whole novels on for, any individual element of that war. But we're digesting it in the fifth level down of what the actual events are.
Yeah.
And then contextualizing it in terms of the American story and so many things.
Yeah.
There's so many layers of story on top of that. It's all fiction, effectively.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then there's that. And then there's, let's say, Bob Dylan writing a song about that. It's just another layer of abstraction.
Yeah.
And that is a thing that Eric Weinstein is referencing as, oh, that Bob Dylan song, that's telling you the news. Or that's as if it's telling you the news. It's no, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the idea of, fiction, that there are, the whole premise of art, at least for me, is, that you use fiction or hyper reality to kind of elucidate reality, but that you aren't necessarily representing or portraying reality in the work that you do. And the idea, I love Baudrillard so much, and I think
I actually didn't know that. That's great.
Oh yeah. I mean, I just reread Simulacra and Simulation a little while ago, and dude was just so ahead of his time. It's it's amazing how many things he was talking about, which seemed just insane. In the 70s, 80s when he was writing some of that stuff, and it's all just kind of come to pass exactly how he said it would. I kind of take I think all of history is fiction. Not to say that like events didn't happen, because they obviously did, but I think that when someone asks you how was your day yesterday, like whatever comes out of your mouth is essentially a fiction, and much less something that happened 2 weeks ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Like we have no real grounding in reality. Like history has like a very kind of spider thread relationship to like actual like reality.
Right.
I think. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I kind of see it the same way. I mean, I do kind of think that all these people have different jobs. Like the historian has a different job from the philosopher, from the journalist, and the artist. I feel like when you take the artist, I think that Bob Dylan has said this, and you kind of alluded to this. The job of the artist is to tell us how we feel by telling us how they feel. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I suppose in a sense, if Bob Dylan or whoever is writing a song that is telling him how he feels about a particular world event, then that does inform us on how we should feel. But, I mean, I still kind of feel like there are still, world events, like big world events. Last year you sent me a song by the Viagra Boys, and it was kind of like making fun of the Trump phenomenon. I'm not sure exactly what it was making fun of. Also, like vaccine hesitancy. Like it was like.
Oh yeah.
It was just kind of like.
Oh, they got the creepy crawlies in the vaccine.
Yeah, it was that, and I guess it was like the conspiracy theory thing. It was like the conspiracy theory mindset that it was really capturing. Mm-hmm. And oh my god, like if that wasn't capturing the spirit of the day,
dude,
and commenting on like how like putting some emotion to that.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, like that was so fucking present.
That whole Cave World record is, I think like people will listen to that in 30 years and be like, you want to know what like life was like during like 2020 to 2022 and like just the overall like ambiance of the world.
It was captured.
Listen to that record. Like I think it is like a high art piece of work.
Oh, absolutely.
And,
yeah.
But it does it through humor and like hyperbole and like taking on like the mindset of people that like you probably wouldn't want to interact with in like your day-to-day life, and like it's it's really powerful. And like to me, like I think Cave World's one of the best records to come out in a long time.
I feel like that the people that they're commenting on that isn't their audience, so it really is a commentary on a group of people that others will be like, oh shit, so that's what's going on with those folks, that sort of thing, perhaps.
Yeah.
But so I mean, I do think that there's some of that, and I am not as up on music as I used to be, so I'm sure there's like way more of that happening as well. But I do think like the average song that's out there being produced, it's still kind of like just talking about relationships and love and how hard it is to be alive in general.
Yeah.
That shit is timeless, and I feel like just having that still come out of the mouths of the youth, as music tends to do, that still makes it so that it's commenting on modern life and modern events from an artistic perspective.
For sure.
Right?
I agree with that, but I also do think that there is kind of like a trend in our in Western culture, in like technological like modernity, to be very insular. And I think that from my own kind of vantage point or whatever, like I find music nowadays, like not like the actual music itself, but like the content, the presentation of a lot of music to be very, very discrete, demographic, social, identity, politic, interest driven, rather than like, here's what's going on in the world in some kind of like large format kind of way. It's like, I think that like most music now is like hyper individuated, maybe not individuated, but like lifestyle, like niche lifestyle, worldview kind of driven.
Well,
Does that, you know what I'm saying?
No, I think that that's a really interesting point. I have something that just sparked a question for me though, which was that, okay, so let's just take San Francisco. It's like a hub of tech.
Yeah.
Right? Back in the 1960s, it was a hub of counterculture.
Yeah.
The people who were creating that movement also were creating the art that was the movement itself.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's kind of like a tech hub, and the techies aren't necessarily creating any sort of entertainment product that's commenting on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like there's no voice of the techie that is the thing. So I mean, in a sense, back in the 60s, the movements were created by the creators.
I would 100% disagree.
Okay, I want to hear this. Yeah.
Okay, so my personal read on, like, we're talking about like San Francisco 60s, is that like none of that shit ever happened. Like,
I kind of know what you're talking about, but yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So
it's a mythology, right?
It's a mythology, and it's something that, like, the entire like movement, the hippie movement, like when you really drill down, like it was like 10 people.
And it was like 1 year too. Right?
Yeah,
and then it got overrun with homeless people, is what I understand.
Well, yeah, and but the reason for all that is because the media in, like, you know, we're talking like post-war, like late 1950s, like there's nothing happening, you know, in like culture. It is like, you know, parade, you know, just like this weird kind of like North Korean patriotic military culture. Like, I feel like that's kind of like what was being presented and pushed on like American culture at that time, you know, and it reflects in a lot of like the mainstream media. And I think that people in their boredom were like, man, let's see what these fucking weirdos are doing. And, you know, so then you have this fixation on like motorcycle gangs, like, you know, Hell's Angels. You have like fixation on like these people who were like involved in various ways with like early psychedelic stuff, whether you're talking about like university people or
Charles Manson
or the government, you know, and like all of these things were just kind of happening, and the media, in order to create interest, to sell products, to build narratives, just kind of pumped that stuff. And like like it wasn't like the hippies that were in control of like the hippie movement. The hippies, you know, there was that whole thing in San Francisco, like in the early 60s, where they had like this funeral called the Death of the Hippie. And this was like before any of that stuff became like televised or like in media. Like they knew that was over, and there was like the 10 people that were like involved in like the art world and like cultural sphere in San Francisco, hung it up for the most part. And then it just became this kind of like media fixation and debacle, which, you know, it's like if you build it, they will come. By doing that, all of a sudden, like these kids from Massachusetts, you know, trust fund kids are like, we want to be a part of this thing that like isn't even really happening, but like here we're all going to go to San Francisco and like I can do whatever, and like, and by default, like that creates a thing.
Yeah.
But it's like that wasn't like
it's a simulation.
It's a simulation. Yeah, it's something. Exactly. You know, and you know, it's the same kind of like, are you really participating in like an authentic reality, or are you kind of like participating in a narrative that you're being fed to by corporate interests and various entities that have something to gain. And I speak specifically as a musician, but I do think this kind of like penetrates all artistic endeavors and fields right now, which is like the dream of the 90s. Like, I'll just stick to music here. Like, in the 90s, there were a bunch of mostly technological advances that enabled people to make music and distribute music outside of like the auspices of like a major label or like the $1 million budgets that went into like records and all of this stuff, home recording, digital recording, file sharing in the early 2000s.
That does parallel book creation because it's so easy to create and market your own book.
Yeah.
And also movie making.
Yeah.
We made a movie 2 years ago.
Yeah.
John on an iPhone with like a $0 budget. You
Yeah.
could not have done that. 20
Exactly.
years ago.
But I think that like, isn't that great? We're liberated from our corporate overlords, and we can make whatever we want, and everything's great. But like my personal experience and opinion is that like, especially when Spotify hit, instead of like providing a platform for like independent artists to like make the thing that they dream about at night and that lives in their head and like bring it to the world, that it kind of forced everyone, it forced the rules of big business and kind of corporate greed and like all of that stuff onto independent artists. So like now, like instead of now everyone that like makes music is like thinking like the CEO of like Warner Brothers and making decisions like an A&R person, not an artist. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I do exactly.
And I think it's had like a really detrimental influence on music and the arts, where it's it's forced people to like get out of their art brain and like be in their business brain or their kind of like A&R brain, which is like, all of these things are necessary to like get your art to an audience, but like that's not always like the best place to work from as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the people who bubble up are going to be the people who are really good at that marketing shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Not the people who are really great at the art.
Yeah.
Whereas back in the day, you just had to be kind of like discovered. Now you have to like be the person who discovers yourself in a sense and markets it. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really pernicious for not just music, but all the arts, which is just really unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think, like, I've heard people say that back, like, pre-recorded music, everyone just did their own thing, and there was no hope of getting rich off of playing the guitar and singing. It was just like a thing you did around the campfire.
Yeah.
I wouldn't actually be too mortified if we went back to that a little bit. And this whole thing of like the god rock stars, if that was just a blip in history and kind of went away, I wouldn't be mortified by that, because I think that the true human value is just hanging out with your friends, maybe like seeing a show at a bar. That's like the great thing. I mean, and also like, the show at the bar, the dude also like has an account online where you can like download his tunes.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see anything tragic about that necessarily. I think that like it's tragic in the sense that when I was 16, I dreamed of becoming that rock star but I mean, that wasn't like my highest artistic urge, right? That was my corporate greed side to be like, oh my God, I could be Mick Jagger, Which like maybe that's not the artistic impulse that culture even necessarily wants to promote in us.
I agree.
I say that, like, unfortunately, as I continually produce art, books in my case, and try to market them, kind of for the sake of when you create something, especially when you put your heart into it, you do want other people to experience it.
Yeah.
Right. It is like equally tragic. It's tragic to sell your soul to be the marketing guy, but it's also tragic to make something beautiful
that you're proud of and it not.
And there's no means to produce it or to share it with the world.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The one other piece here, just before we move off of art, that I just want to like ask about. So I wrote a piece this week about is Moloch the correct analogy for AI? A lot of people online are starting to coalesce around the view that Moloch is the correct view.
Is AI a Canaanite god?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so, well, this is like a really interesting piece. You know how people continually these days say, "Oh, that's like religion. Oh, this is like religion. Oh, like wokeism is a religion," right?
Yeah.
Everything is kind of like, I don't know. I find it like very curious that everything is being defined as religion these days. Now, apparently AI. What are your thoughts on that? Rather than like art, why isn't art the thing that like gets to choose the analogy for AI?
Because everything is religious. I mean, that's why Demon Wrangler exists.
Oh, right. Okay, so Sam has a band, Demon Wrangler.
Yeah,
we'll have to link it. And it is kind of like a high/low brow mockery commentary on religious music, or is it just like the imagery that you're commenting on, not necessarily the religious experience? I'm not too sure.
I want to be a little coy about like the full intent, but like I would kind of describe it as like a very serious. Like it takes religion. It's a band about spirituality and about religion and like the human experience. But there's a certain level of there's self-awareness and humor in it. But like it's not really coming from a place of like inauthenticity.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, yeah. So you have a degree in anthropology, right? You just said that everything is kind of religious.
Yeah.
I mean, what is religion? And I mean, okay, so to bring it back a little bit to my initial question, the metaverse, that concept is taken from a book by Neil Stephenson, Snow Crash.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That concept wasn't taken from like the Book of Revelation, right? I don't know. And my argument would be, if we had taken the word from the Book of Revelation, we would see it differently. We would see the metaverse as a different thing.
Okay.
I think metaphors always inform upon the thing they're talking about. Like, this thing is like this, right? And then you run with that, and that's what a metaphor is.
Yeah.
So,
well,
like, where are we with the world of, yes, everything kind of is religious. I kind of know what you mean by that. Maybe you can spell that out a little bit. But like, what does it mean, and what does it mean for the future of how we interact with technology if we are just gonna make everything like we're to live with religious metaphors for whatever we build in the future?
Well, I mean, to kind of like dig into the religious metaphor thing. I think okay.
Religious metaphors are fucking great. This is why the music of Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan is so timeless, is that they're referencing these metaphors, and they're so good because they're so rich. Yeah. That's the thing.
I also think there are like impulses that are like innate in like human culture and history that like for instance, we didn't have weapons of mass destruction until the last 100 years, right? Bombs, rockets, and stuff. But in the, I think it's the Upanishads, like in like Hindu Sanskrit books, sacred texts, people like, you can tell that like people were thinking about the rocket as like a weapon 6,000 years ago.
In the Bible, there's a passage in Ecclesiastes about a thing that will power the whole world.
Yeah, stuff
like a source of power.
And flying, like human flight. Right. Like people, like this was like
maybe
on people's minds.
Religious books aren't religious books. Maybe they're science fiction books, Sam.
Yeah, like, I think they do speak to, like, innate, deep human stuff that is, like, very relevant and, like, undergirds most of, like, what people do, regardless of whether it's 2,000 years ago or today.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that people are much different, and, like, I think there's a we tend to look at religion in a way that is, because a lot of this stuff did happen a long time ago, through like kind of like a fairy tale, through a kind of like religious perspective, instead of through like a more utilitarian kind of perspective. In the Bible, there is like already this weird tenuous relationship between knowledge and power, and the idea of stealing God's power. And I think the idea that like the like AI is this this kind of God. I think it's like functionally, if you look at like what role that plays in people's lives, I think it's like pretty true. In the same kind of way that like, in the Bible, like, there's like the Tower of Babel, like that whole story where like essentially there are these like rich kings, and they're like, like we're going to build this crazy tower to heaven, and it's going to like, it's going to be this like deep symbolic statement of like our like superiority. And like that was the AI of the time. As we move through like culture, it's like we're always using analogies and like metaphors based on like where our technology is at that very moment. So like, you go back to like turn of this century, and it's like right after like the Industrial Revolution, right? And everything was talked about through this like machine kind of narrative. The body is just like this machine. You put food in it and it's like steam, like the food is like the coal for this steam engine.
Right.
And like now, with like computing, like people are like, well, the brain is like a computer,
Right.
And it's like, it's actually none of those things. It's not a machine. It's not a computer. These are just like, that's just how people relate to their environment, is by like using technology as some kind of like yardstick to like discuss the thing. But like the technology itself is just an extension of like the human experience, and it's not really that different than building a pyramid 7,000 years ago or whatever,
We have this in storytelling. We have this sense of awe,
Yeah.
and this sense of wonder, and you can tap into it by using analogies.
Yeah.
By using analogies that are bigger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of like the fundamental like logic that's happening here, whether we're using religious metaphors or some other science fiction metaphors or medical metaphors
Yeah.
or whatever. There really just is that thing in our brain that we can get this sense of awe, this
Yeah.
sense of wonder. And that is captured like in ancient religious texts, because
Yeah.
they felt that sense of awe just like we do, but they prescribed it to like the fucking sky,
Yeah.
and shit like that. That is, the sky is awe. It is gives us that sense of awe. And we have lost a way to talk about the sense of awe the sky gives us because we know too much about it.
Yeah, but I think we just keep replacing, like, the closer to like we get to see God, the more God will pull back, and like we're no longer in awe of the sky because we've been to the sky.
Right.
But like that hasn't like supplanted our, like now our gaze is now on.
Now we think about the universe, right?
I would even argue that our gaze has returned to like the inner universe, and that
good
like,
point.
like we're kind of like approaching this point in culture where like, the pipe dreams of the early, 1900s of, the Jetsons flying around in cars, and like all of this stuff is just like not happening. And like
it kind of is. They have flying taxis now.
Yeah, but like, have you been in one?
They're gonna roll it out at LAX.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
It's actually happening.
Oh, that's pretty crazy. Okay, all right.
And
that's sick.
And
I'm there for it.
One of the New York airports is gonna roll out. Good YouTube videos on it. Like Vox has a video on it, I think.
Yeah, but like on the flips, like that's not gonna like really change.
We're not in the Jetsons.
We're not in the Jetsons, and like if you went 3,000 years ago, instead of a flying taxi, like and you had money, people would carry you in a lift. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing. Like ultimately, like people's realities, the worlds that they live in, are as much like technological progress that we've made over the last 500 years. Our day-to-day lives are not that much different than they were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Like, to me, I don't know, does that make sense? Like,
no, it totally does. I mean, it really, really, really does. I like my last question here, kind of follow up to that, is what do you think art will look like in the future, and what is the role of artists in the future? And I say this partly, I couch this question in terms of what's happening with AI, and AI is going to start helping us write screenplays and novels and music, obviously. You can generate kind of catchy tunes with AI. There was a Jay-Z tune that dropped the other day. Jay-Z had nothing to do with it. It was all AI.
Yeah.
My thought is we will create new forms of art, and these will be tools that we just use. But what do you think is like the role of the artist, and how will artists continue to inform culture in your view?
This might be like wishful thinking, but I kind of I have like a weird faith in this, which is that like art, like until they make a robot, an AI driven robot that can dance like a human being, like a trained ballet dancer, who cares? Like I think that there's a lot of kind of like technological and scientific hubris that we've we're gonna be able to like make whatever, and I'm just like, do it then, until there's like, until I see like the spontaneous like living grace and like beauty that I see in like a human being from something that's not a human being, that's like made by human beings, like I'm kind of like, prove it. I'm not that impressed. Mm-hmm. Maybe some people, when was it, like at Coachella 10 years ago, where they had like fucking like Tupac's hologram performing. Yeah. I'm just like, if that's entertaining to you,
it probably is for like 10 minutes.
For like 10 minutes, then you're like, this is fucking stupid. Like, let's see a person. Let's see, I want to see Young Thug. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see like a outlandish person, an outlandish meat person, doing something that like is inspiring to me or cool or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, I just don't think that like anyone's ever going to look at like a robot and feel inspired.
Yeah.
They might be like, this is sick, this is cool. But I think that there are like deeper dimensions of the human experience that may never really be able to touch.
There's a human connection missing, because when you hear Jay-Z, like real Jay-Z versus like AI Jay-Z, real Jay-Z, you can like imagine yourself, one, like meeting him in the street, and two, becoming a good enough rapper yourself that you could do those same things.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's just like it's a talent, and talents are things that you can take on board yourself.
Yeah, and talents are mysterious. Like that's
Yeah.
like one of the things too. Is like, you know, I was just speaking of Jay-Z. You know, like there was like just like some clip that I saw where like they were like, I think it was like with Rick Rubin, and it was like Rick Rubin talking about like working with Jay-Z and just being like, this dude would like show up in the studio with like nothing written down, and then would just like sing to himself in this like creepy child voice. And like that was his process, and he was like, this is the weird, he was like, it was so weird, like working with Jay-Z, because you're just like, even like what you know of him as an artist, when you're like seeing the process, you're just like, where is this coming from? And like this, you know, the whole context to it was like so strange and like idiosyncratic and like mysterious. And like, how does this guy like come up with like these great rhymes and like keep it all in his head, when then like, you know, you have someone else where it's like, you know, like Eminem, who's like got the quill and parchment and writes everything down, and like, you know, like there's just, you know, you can have two artists that are like elites in the same field that could just be like, there's almost like no crossover in the way that they do their thing, and like, and it's like you can't figure that out. Like I think there's like things like you can learn to like absorb people's things, but like the ultimate source for that stuff is like just so beyond kind of like what at least the foreseeable future of like, you know, AI or mapping the brain or whatever, like it's still coming from like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And I think like, you know, the Twilight Zone, the Mystery Zone, the multiverse that like people are tapped into naturally, like, are you really going to be able to map that?
Well, there is something that to say that like a lot of our comments on human relationships, what good is that commentary if there's no actual physical human relationship that's being commented on?
Yeah.
Right? So you know, Kurt Cobain writes a song about an ex-girlfriend. He actually had that ex-girlfriend. If an AI Kurt Cobain wrote a new song about an ex-girlfriend, there was no ex-girlfriend, you know? So it's kind of like, there's no, even if it's exactly the same words, the fact that in meat suit reality it didn't happen makes it way just less interesting.
I mean, you know, I would kind of like personally, I rarely write about people.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I mean, I write about people, but like not like individual. Like most of the time, like if a character or something, you know, like a person appears in some kind of work that I'm doing lyrically or whatever, it's usually some kind of amalgamation of multiple people.
Yeah, I mean that's how I work.
Or,
too.
you know what I mean? But it all is like grounded in some kind of like real experience. You know,
oftentimes I'm grounded in other things I've read by like something Alfred Jerry wrote.
Yeah.
For example, but also a real person who, at some level, it was a real person having a real experience that we're kind of channeling.
Yeah. 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 So I mean, like, I don't know, like the truth, like I'm very like, you know, in the arts, like I'm very disinterested in truth. Like in the way that like most people would quantify it. Does that make sense?
I mean, I'm totally with you. We actually probably agree on that because I think I see where you're going. Like I want to take it a little bit to, like, I just said the thing about like relationships and humans, and it's important that we could actually form relationships with the artists is, I think, a thing. But I mean, I think that actually might start to disintegrate a little bit as people stop having as many real world relationships and have actually meaningful relationships with AIs. There are all kinds of stories about this with people like dating an AI, knowing it's an AI, but then when like the AI program goes away, they have like this real feelings of remorse.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we're kind of silly. Like our brains are kind of silly in that we can trick ourselves very easily that a fake thing is a real thing. We do this all the time with our pets.
Yeah.
Like, your cat doesn't give a fuck about you, but you kind of like put emotions onto your cat and read them back.
Yeah.
And that's also like an informative experience, but your cat doesn't care about you.
Yeah, or it does in ways that like you aren't really equipped as a human being to fully articulate with.
Like what's dumber, like having a relationship with a goldfish or with an AI?
It's the same.
It's the same,
like,
yeah.
you know, and I think that like you know, we all kind of live in our own fantasies and project the world far more than we interact with the world.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you grew up religious. Like, you ever see anyone cry in church?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like me too. And that used to weird me out more. That used to weird me out in the way that, like, I'm just like, this motherfucker never met Jesus. Like, how is he so emotionally involved with, like, this, like, pseudo-historical 2,000-year-old character?
Yeah.
And I, you know, I thought it was really bizarre. But like, I feel like the older that I get, like, the less weird and even, like, the less, like, dysfunctional that seems, you know? Because, like, dude, you know, I was listening to this Arthur Russell record the other day, and I was just crying. Like, it was like, I was just like, man, this hits like so many. This just like hits so hard, and then I'm like, I've never met this person's been dead for like 30 years. Like, I don't know anything about who they were as a person. I don't even know what this fucking song is about. Like, at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't really know what the song is about, but like, it is just doing something to me, and maybe I'm projecting my own meaning onto it,
right?
You know, and like whatever, and but it's providing something for me, and it's like
that is real. That's why people like tarot cards, right? Most
Yeah.
people don't buy into them as being like really telling the future or whatever they're supposed to do. It's like you project something onto them, and then you learn about yourself through that process.
Yes, exactly.
And the people who like made tarot cards were very self-aware about that, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that. Yeah, absolutely, and I think a lot of technology works in the same facet. Where like, I think if anything, like, AI is going to teach us more about humanity, like, in some weird ways, like it's already done that. Like, just like, you know, the last like 100 years of like data accumulation has made people like understand the mind in, I think, you know, in ways that are like really profound, and like human behavior, like herd human behavior, or like even individual behavior, the way that like we form memories, the way that we you know, as we learn more about mental illness and like actually start to unravel like what that actually means, because like I think that's still like a kind of like, you know, we're still like in the very like infant stages of dealing with like mental illness, like as a society, and yeah, we continue to learn more and more about our human experiences through like technology. You know, we learn about the cosmos through the technology of the telescope. We learn about what's underneath our ocean through the technology of like sonar. But like all of these things like don't really supplant like the primacy of the human experience. They just augment it. Yeah. And like so ultimately coming like super full circle, you know, like the idea that AI poses any like real threat to artists is like it does not keep me up at night. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like, clearly technology as it shifts has profound and kind of immediate influences about
Yes.
how artists are paid.
Yeah. But
whether or not any artist should give up what they're doing, you know, and scrap the whole enterprise.
yeah.
That hasn't really changed ever at all. Ever
Well,
since the dawn of time when the first poem was written.
Yeah.
It's all just been like, yeah, this is a worthwhile cause.
Yeah.
And I think that I do see that continuing, yeah.
I think you know, like I'm glad I'm not like a visual artist right now.
Me too, yes.
Because like
Yeah.
I do think that like the visual arts are going to, in like this short term like event horizon or whatever, the visual arts are going to be the hardest hit by AI. But like, is it really that different than like the popularization of like photography for what painters were doing in like the turn of the century, where like
At least equally as profound.
yeah, and all the good painters of that period immediately, like you can see it across, you know, in every, you know, American art, European art. Like as soon as like the camera became like a thing where like you could capture photographs like of reality, painters were like, I'm gonna draw all this shit with boxes.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, or, you know, like yeah, like you start having like the Picassos and the Dalis and like they're just the gaze, like the interest shifts. You have this like return to primitive art. You have this like return to figurative stuff into just like things that are like kind of almost like textile, like, you know, the kind of like Dutch neoplastic, like D-style, kind of just like almost like architectural stuff, you know. And it's like I don't ever like sit around like, man, it's such a bummer like people don't draw like paintings of like natural scenery, you know, or like you know, like that kind of stuff. I'm just
If
like,
they did,
I don't
you would
care.
look at that and say, like, why are you doing that? That's so boring.
Yeah,
Try harder.
like paint something you can't see, you can only see with the mind.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't need a picture of this, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
Cool. Hey, well, that's a good place to wrap it up. Thanks, Sam, for anybody
You're very
interested
welcome.
in checking out more from the Sam Eliot and his religious experiences. How do you find Demon Wrangler online?
Demon Wrangler Band across platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Bandcamp. Those are the main sources. I don't really do Twitter.
Demon Wrangler. Yeah,
Demon
if you
Wrangler.
Google it, shit comes up.
Yep,
And,
Demon Wrangler Band. At Demon Wrangler Band will find you all the madness and the religious fervor that you could ever want.
And you won't be sorry. Hide your kids.